Hey everyone, and welcome back to Afrodo Reviews. On this channel, I help you decide. Will you stop licking yourself? I help you decide. Is that book worth reading? Huh. Deja vu. Anyways, I help you decide. Is that book worth reading over second breakfast? Or does it deserve the fiery pits of Mount Doom? Today's book is Repeat After Me, a young adult fantasy novel that was published on September 3rd of 2024 by author Jessica Warman, which, by the way, awesome name to have. I hope it's an actual name, not a pseudonym. That's how much I like it. The book is less than 2 months old as of me writing the script and probably recording it. So honestly, I don't have too much to share about it in terms of background or, special little tidbits about this thing. Even Jessica Warman, despite having published about 5 other books before this, doesn't seem to have too much about her online, and the supposed blog link I found on Goodreads just leads to a Japanese post about hair removal. So, yeah, I don't have much else to do but to move on to the report card itself. So, here you go. And then we move on to the cover. Now, the cover of this book is actually fairly decent in my opinion. At least I like it. I like the contrasting colors, which with the use of black on blue, and as you can tell, I got one of the special edition books. So the pages are very colorful, and, they have art dispersed between them. Even removing the dust cover, this book is more to look at than just, a blank page. Don't get me wrong, it's not a lot to look at, but it's got a nice bright pink, you got some designs on the side, and even the front has this nice glossy imagery. All in all, I don't have any complaints about it, though I won't say I have much more in terms of glowing praise. It's effective and decent for what it is, but I've seen better, but I've definitely seen a lot worse. But what's this story about, I hear you ask? Well, let me read you the synopsis on this book. She's about to have a serious temporal tantrum. In retrospect, I probably should have passed on the ceviche. It was already a weird Friday. My class is stuck on the eerily remote island of our senior trip. I'm pretty sure Mr. D, call me Max, is hiding something from us. My ex-best friend turned nemesis keeps stealing my candy. And tonight's plan for my boyfriend and me to finally lose our virginity to each other is going hellishly. I mean, ceviche is delicious, don't get me wrong, but a dish made from a supposedly immortal octopus really should come with a warning label. Caution, consuming a telepathic sea creature of unknown origin may result in immortality, no consequences to any action, and getting stuck in a time loop for all of eternity. Now every morning I wake up, and it's the same Friday all over again. Same annoying classmates, same island suspended in time by an evil oyster farmer with a god complex. Same outrageous candy theft. The only person I can count on to keep me from losing my grip on this new reality is Lewis, my best friend who knows me better than anyone else in the world. This should be a cephalopod-induced nightmare, but somehow, in some ridiculous way, I feel like I'm experiencing the extraordinary, the gift of endless opportunities to get things right. But I woke up every morning and it's Friday again. Sometimes it feels more like a never-ending prison sentence. They say some things are worse than death. Guess I'm about to find out. And honestly, that's a pretty succinct synopsis. I will say it gives away a little too much, but overall, I think it is pretty good. I don't think there's really anything I could add on to this that would really prepare you, other than saying it's not just one person in the time loop. There's more than one. But even then, that's kind of maybe. But I'll get into that a little more later. But for the most part, yeah, that's the synopsis, and it's pretty effective for what it is. It covers enough ground that I think that'll be sufficient for the review. So let's go ahead and move on to that. Let's move on to the real question. What did I think of this book? Yeah, it's fine. I mean, it's a pretty decent book. I was hooked enough that I was able to blitz through about 100 pages of reading in an afternoon just before work. And I never got to the point where I necessarily was ever really frustrated enough with the book and just put it down for a few hours to, catch my mental breath, as it were. And, I am a sucker for a time loop story. And this book did tickle that itch. I love Groundhog Day.
I'm sorry? What was that again?
I'm a god.
And this book clearly derived inspiration from it. Watching our three main protagonists deal with the time loop in their own ways is interesting in certain senses. Emma, who seems to be the sane one, Brad, with 2 Ds, not one, is reveling in this consequence-free world he now lives in, and Max, their teacher, who's been trapped in this time loop for over 41 years, has effectively reached the point where he's grown apathetic to it. He doesn't really care anymore and has grown disillusioned, especially as he has to wake up every morning with the worst hangover he's ever had. When it comes to characters, I have to admit that while Brad with 2 Ds isn't a very serious character, and in real life I'd probably hate this guy, and ultimately, admittedly, he doesn't actually contribute all that much to the plot, he is kind of the best character. I admit that his shenanigans during the time loop and his very chaotic neutral vibes throughout the story was easily some of the best and funniest parts of the book. He openly and freely admits that he basically keeps killing himself by overindulging in self-pleasure, let's say, and refuses to stop even though he knows he's probably going to die again the next morning if he does the same thing. He has an invention that he's sure is a multi-million-dollar idea written all over it, despite the fact that its entire premise can be based off the pun H2 blow. I won't explain it any further than that because I'm pretty sure most people can guess what he means. I can say when he tests it on himself, he drowns. Yes, by the way, we are given full detail that Brad is flexible enough that he can do that to himself. But as much as I want to sit here and gush about this book, I am deeply aware that a lot of my enjoyment of this book is rooted in a very guilty pleasure. Because when I sat down and started to think critically about this book, when I started to type out the script, I realized just how much of it doesn't hold up to like a closer look. For example, the biggest flaw of this book is that it is almost 90% build-up for a payoff that never comes. Nothing is explained or clarified in the end, and several character arcs just don't happen. And while that's not necessarily a bad thing, sort of like Phil Connors in Groundhog Day, we never actually found out why he became trapped in the Groundhog Day loop, and we don't know for sure how he escaped. But in this book, I will say that's a little worse, because we do actually know what trapped the character in the time loop. And because of that, the book sets the precedent that it's at least going to explain the loop a little more. It does explain things. It doesn't just, this stuff is happening because that's what's happening. And the book keeps teasing at that idea repeatedly throughout the story. For example, Bredda, 2 Ds, finds a brick of what he thinks is Peruvian marching powder, and every day he uses it. When Emma and Max finally confront him, he admits that the powder detaches him from the time loop and can shoot him both forward and backward in time. And we learn later that this isn't actually the white lobster that Bredda thought it was, but something more experimental directly connected to the time loop and the immortal octopus mentioned in the synopsis. When Emma uses it, she successfully jumps back in time to the previous day, but is intercepted by Greta, the daughter of the scientist with the God complex, who somehow knows Emma was able to de-anchor herself from the time loop, and then kills Emma so she'll reset to Friday again. And that's the last we ever hear of that subplot. No, I'm serious. That neither Max or Emma try to the jump again, despite the fact that both, unlike Bredda, want to escape the time loop. And the last we even discuss it, Gus is making a deal with Bredda to do blood work on him, because Bredda was something of an anomaly. We never find out what it is, how it did what it did, or where it even came from. Even the whole Brad getting blood work done on him, Bredda getting blood work done on him, doesn't amount to anything, because after that moment, Bredda is effectively no longer a character in the story. Like I said, he's a chaotic force of nature that just pops up for fun. Speaking of, that was another thing I didn't really understand about the story. Bredda holds existence in this time loop. Now, I admitted he was easily my favorite character. But he doesn't really make a lot of sense in the story itself. Everything from Greta and Gus, that's the name of the scientist with the God complex, trapping him in the time loop to how he interacts with it. To put into perspective, Gus and Greta put him in the time loop to supposedly save his life after he drowns himself trying to invent his H2 blow. Except, why? By this point, Max has been in the time loop for 41 years, and Emma has been in it for at least 3 days. Both were brought in due to Greta's interest in them. She was in love with, or it's more accurate to say she was obsessed with Max, and Greta felt sorry for Emma due to her judgmental nature. But why Brad? Gus doesn't seem particularly happy to have saved him, and this can't be the first time Bradida has died. Max even makes a comment at one point in this book is that the reason he has them pick up trash every Friday instead of doing something else that they were planned is because that's the only thing he found where one of the kids doesn't manage to kill themselves during the event. And we learn that Augie, Emma's boyfriend, originally would die in their attempt to take Emma's virginity due to a severe latex allergy. This means Bradida and several other students have died before in previous time loops. So why all of a sudden was it this time loop where they decided to save him? Why not save Augie, one of those time loops he died of latex? Why not save Allison, one of those times she maybe choked to death on the Swedish fish she stole? Why not save Gianluca when he, trips and drowns himself in the ocean? Furthermore, another issue with that is Bradida interacts with the time loop differently than Emma and Max. They're both trapped in a true Groundhog Day scenario. When they die or go to sleep, they instantly wake up again on Friday morning, as if nothing happened. However, the way they learned Bradida got trapped in the time loop is he once again drowned himself trying to test his H2 blow, and he was cold and dead. But as they're sitting there arguing about it with some people who aren't in the time loop, he suddenly comes back to life after his death. And literally rises from the grave and comes back to life. Not reset, resurrecting.
I'm a god. I'm not the god. I don't think.
At first, the story seems to imply this is because Gus gave him something different. And maybe that's true. But again, the story doesn't explain why he's interacting with the time loop so differently than Emma or Max. Another thing. How do Gus, Greta, and Steve the intern have such temporal awareness of what's going on? It's one thing to be aware of the time loop they put Max in, but the book outright shows they not only are aware of each passing time loop, retaining their memories from the previous one, but they also know when someone is out of place in time. Like I mentioned earlier, when Emma manages to travel back to the day before Thursday with that what they think was marching powder, or Colombian nose candy. There we go. Greta instantly realizes it and kills Emma to reset her forcibly. Why are they both so completely aware of the time loop? And at the same time, why are they unbound by it? It's just one of those things that doesn't make sense and definitely should have been explained. Also, how the time loop might have been broken at the end is not explained either. Throughout the book, we get hints that Emma's senior goal is somehow related to breaking the time loop, at least her specific one. And we find out that goal was what she wanted to lose. And we find out that goal is she wanted to lose her virginity before she went off to college. Now, the book kind of seems confused on this. It seems to be angling that Emma should feel in no hurry or rush to lose her virginity. Rather, that there are more important things in her life to worry about than getting laid. Greta more or less flat out spells this out when Emma demands to know how to escape the time loop. So, you think it's going to the root of the Groundhog Day again, where the only way Phil, or in this case Emma, manages to escape the loop is by becoming a more complete person who has overall different goals. It does even seem to go this way, as when Emma tries to lose her virginity, not just to her boyfriend, but the best friend she's actually in love with, there always seems to be something that interferes with it at the last second. Her best friend always seems to back out no matter how many times she tries, or how many different ways she approaches it. And her boyfriend, he'll die of a latex allergy, or he'll have some severe reaction, or he'll squirm out of it, or something like that. Except, by the end of the book, it's implied she escapes the loop by losing her virginity. Or maybe it was Sybil sucking out Brad's time loop powers instead, and the popping of the cherry was completely unrelated. Either way, it sends a completely mixed message by having the last thing to be done before the loop maybe was broken is having Emma lose her virginity, because then all that beforehand where you was telling her it doesn't matter, there are more important things in life, no one's gonna make fun of you for going to college and because you hadn't lost your virginity yet. Don't feel pressured to do it. And then all of a sudden she's rewarded for losing it. You know what I mean? But there are other problems with this book. Admittedly, these are more minor than the previous one. That one is easily the biggest problem. But I can understand why these problems I'm about to mention can turn people off. For example, despite the fact that this is a young adult book clearly set in the modern day, which as I'm recording and publishing this, it'll be 2024, all of the teenagers come off more like they're from my generation than the current one that should be in this book. They all have that sort of millennial nostalgia to them when you read. And the way they act makes a lot more sense if the book had been set between the years of 2009 and 2014, rather than the years of 2020 and onwards. The book is also very loose with the term young adult. I mentioned this when I was reviewing Fourth Wing, but there is a genre that's trying to be coined called new adult, where it's basically young adult, but the author wants to be very explicit with their sexual themes and scenes. And let me tell you, if there's any book that should have been labeled new adult, this one. I'm not one of those Puritans who demands that young adults should not be exposed to any form of this kind of theme ever. While there is a great focus on the element, stuff like Fourth Wing is definitely more graphic in the actual act being depicted. However, as pointed out, there's the whole virginity thing, the whole virginity subplot. There's a very strange focus on sex and, bodily fluids and those themes of it. To the point that, and I don't mean this as a joke, by the way, Brad kills a seagull with the force of his, she'll be riding 6 white horses when she... He kills a seagull like that. Again, I'm not kidding. Funny scene for me, but this is supposed to be a young adult novel, so it is a little out of place, it feels like. I think it would have been fine in smaller doses, but this book is just, it really overdoes it. Albeit, again, I can't fault it for much more than that, because teenagers are very horny people, and this is kind of a reality in fiction more than it's anything else. It's sort of like how it frustrated me with Eruption, how stupid the military was being. Yeah, it really pissed me off, but at the same time, unfortunately, I could see a lot of the dumb mistakes the military was making actually happening in real life. Also, I'm not a big fan of how this book uses most of its characters. So, at first I was a little worried. When this book starts out, it sort of seems like there's going to be 7 POV characters in this. And there kind of is, but let me explain. So you have Max, who's the teacher, Augie, who's Emma's boyfriend, Lewis, Emma's best friend, Brad, one of the people that does get stuck in the time loop, and he's like, imagine the dumb jock stereotype. You have Lucy, the gay one. That's kind of her personality now. No offense. You have Emma, who is more or less our main character, and you have Allison, the character on the cover that's said to be her ex-best friend turned nemesis. By the way, very misleading. I should have brought that up during then, but Allison isn't so much a nemesis as she is an annoyance to Emma. They're not really hateful of each other. Now, with a spattering of minor characters outside from this, you get even less characterization, but the book doesn't disillusion you into thinking they're going to be more involved with the story. I thought this book was going to do a thing where all of these characters got trapped in the time loop. Now, I was worried about it at first because I thought about them getting all trapped in the time loop, And then I looked at the amount of pages in this book, and I'm like, I don't think the author has enough room to cover 7 characters coming to grips with themselves in a time loop. But I did think it would have been interesting if she did have that amount of time, and maybe she could have surprised me. I was pretty interested to see what this time loop would do to various people, as opposed to just following one character. For example, Brada did basically what I expected, and explored the idea of someone who would love the consequence-free day, while also desperately trying to avoid the harsh realities of the world that he's not trapped in a time loop. Max is the person who would be like Phil Connors. After he'd been in the time loop long enough, he's subjected to apathy, both trying not to care, but clearly still does even 40 years later, holding on to just that tiny bit of hope that one day it will break. And despite that, he hasn't lost any of his morals. He's maybe ruder, he may be harsher, but he still does things like saving Augie from a latex allergy, despite knowing Augie will just come back during the next loop and probably do the same thing the next Friday.
Tiny village in western Pennsylvania, blah, 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 blah. As long as this groundhog keeps seeing his shadow, I don't see any other way out. He's got to be stopped.
And then, the characters that don't get the time loop. Allison had a clear arc set up where it seemed like she had been forced to grow up a bit and learn what she thinks is playful teasing and fun is actually her just being mean to people. And learning to accept herself for what she really is, because she tries to act like this dumb blonde bimbo, despite she's one of the most intelligent characters in the book. Lucy had something of an arc set up where she seems to be the butt of a joke a lot of the time, and is a bit more of a stickler for the rules, probably coming from a very strict household, which is also trying to punish her for being gay. Setting up the idea that maybe she would eventually learn to rebel against authority to be herself unabashedly, despite the rules. Lewis seemed like he would learn to accept his feelings for Emma, and overcome the various traumas he's endured from a young age, as well as coming to grips with his parents deciding to separate. While Augie, I could see becoming the type of person who becomes very depressed during the time loop, ultimately becoming the ultimate nihilist, going farther than Max in his apathy. All in all, there was definitely groundwork set that it seemed like all of them were going to go on the time loop. Except the only ones who get trapped are Max, Emma, and Brad. This ultimately means that all the other characters feel largely useless. You don't care what strides Allison seems to make on one of the days to become a better person, because by the next reset she's just going to be back to who she was. The same with Augie, the same with Lewis, the same with Lucy. You didn't learn new things about this from Emma's point of view that you would have learned if you stayed purely in Emma's point of view, because you already learned these things by being in Allison's POV. Yeah, learning that Allison was a lot smarter than she is, and she doesn't really actually understand that what she's doing is mean, not playful, doesn't mean anything when we see that from her perspective, that she doesn't understand what she's doing is mean, and that it's just one of those, it ruins a lot of that, because you don't learn anything new about these characters you didn't already know. So you're not like Emma and learning to see these characters from different perspectives in different ways as you get to know them better. We get their inner characters laid out to us rather from the start. Even Emma was a bit of an odd character. Like, for all of her faults, I could not see her devolving into murdering someone in a fit of rage in only about 30 days. At the very least, not without a lot of emotional consequence. But when she manslaughters Allison, I guess is more fair to say, during one of the loops, apart from some lip service about how she didn't really want to do it again because it didn't feel right, this event isn't really focused on. Even Brad, who openly admits he started killing people out of boredom during some of his loops, gets more introspection from his killings than Emma does from killing Allison. He mentions how it was a lot harder than he thought, and bodies decay faster than he realized in this environment, and how he doesn't really want to do it anymore because while he doesn't hold any regret for doing it, he also just doesn't get really any enjoyment from doing it either. He was doing it just to see what it felt like. It also stands in contrast to Max, who lasted 41 years without killing anyone, as far as we know. Brada I could see devolving this quickly, but Emma was written as someone who was supposed to be the sane man of her group, the normal teenager, if you will. So her falling that fast to it was a bit shocking, and not in a good way. But all in all, 6 out of 10. Yeah, this is one of those books that I had a lot better opinions on when I didn't think about it. But the second I sat at my computer and started thinking critically on it and started typing out this script, my opinion kind of did this thing. When I first finished it, I might have given this book a low 8 or a high 7. But as I organized my thoughts, realized my issues with this book, put into perspective all the things that I'd looked at, I realized that this book was at best a guilty pleasure. I enjoyed reading it, but it's not a book I would really recommend to just anyone, and it clearly in itself has a very specific target audience. It's an okay book, and it's definitely more absurd than it wants to admit, and doesn't really seem to want to embrace it. It tries to play both sides. It tries to both being this absurdist, realist comedy, but then also it also flirts with the idea that it's actually going to explain it and explore characters and that kind of thing. It's definitely not a story I would recommend to anyone who cannot stand an incomplete story. I mean that. The book does not answer anything that it offers, and even the stuff it builds tension to, the stuff it acts like is going to be a big reveal, and it does actually reveal it, is ultimately pretty disappointing. Like, throughout the book, there's Lewis's big secret that's constantly hinted at by Augie and Lewis. And you would think the way they build it up and the way they avoid talking about it, you would think it's going to be bad, like really bad. But in reality, it's just kind of one of those gross things you laugh at when you're in your like late 20s, early 30s because of how stupid you were as a kid. And that's about the extent of that. It's kind of one of those, really, that was it? Like, yeah, that was definitely gross, but it wasn't, I slapped my girlfriend, and now to keep you from beating me to death, I'm threatening to tell her what you did. So, the question of, does it deserve Mount Doom? No, not really. Not for me, at least. I'm pretty sure there are some people out there who would probably toss it in and be like, "Argh!" But again, for me, it's a guilty pleasure. I don't hate it, really. I don't love it either. A guilty pleasure. I have fun with it. But with that being said, just remember, with every book comes an adventure. And every adventure is with... I got you, babe. I got you, babe. They say our love won't fade away. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Afrodo Reviews. On this channel, I help you decide. Will you stop licking yourself? I help you decide. Is that book worth reading? Deja vu.